This is a live event where we're going to discuss topics and questions about our second Analytics Academy course, Google Analytics Platform Principles. We're really excited about this course, and we have over 100,000 students registered all over the globe. This course builds off of some of the ideas that we talked about in our first course, Digital Analytics Fundamentals. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Sagnik Nandy, who's a principal engineer on the Google Analytics team. Welcome.
Well, very, very happy to be here.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do on the team?
So my team manages everything to do with data in Google Analytics, and we have a lot of data. So that ranges from collecting the data, storing the data, making it queryable, so adding additional constructs and tools on top of the data, so segmentation, filtering, all those. My team also manages the real-time system, the API, the developer relation side of it. So anything to do with ingesting data, saving data, and making data completely accessible to end users, that's what kind of we do. That's our business.
So that's the whole product. It sounds like everything.
A fair bit of the product. There are lots of other really bright engineers doing other things. So.
Awesome. Great. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the material in the course, the Google Analytics platform, and then we're going to get to some questions that were submitted by you, our students. So this course, Google Analytics Platform Principles, we spend a lot of time talking about the 4 parts of the platform: collection, processing, configuration, and reporting. So that's obviously something you know a lot about. So in your own words, can you tell us a little bit about why it's so important to really understand the platform?
So I think the platform is basically the underlying tool that makes everything else, all your analysis, possible. So I think there are 2 big benefits of understanding the platform well. One is it gives you a better understanding of the reports you're looking at. So, and this is often non-intuitive, but the same report can be interpreted differently by different people, and that might range from an accurate interpretation to a completely incorrect one. So I think understanding the platform lets you understand what you're looking at, how to look at the data, what insights you can gain from it. A good example would be something like bounce rate. Now, bounce rate is very, very critical for measuring engagement. And let's take the example of a blog. Now, for a blog, a lot of times people just come to a single page and they spend their entire time looking at that page. So even though they're engaged, it might be just one page view and a bounce. So sometimes what people do is they would send us additional event pings to make sure it's not a bounce. But in order to do that, you have to make sure those events are marked as interactive events and not non-interactive events. So understanding these nuances can really help you understand the report you're looking at. If something looks bad, is it really bad? If something looks good, is it really good, etc. So that's one benefit. I think the other big benefit of understanding the platform is it makes you realize what you can do with the system. Yeah. So a good example, analogy would be, imagine if you have a smartphone. You can just use it for making phone calls, but there's so much more you can do with it. And in order to understand that, you need to understand what the various options are. So I think of the platform that way. You can just look at reports, but there's so much more. You can create your own reports. You can segment in certain ways. You can set up your own filters. All these things. So once you understand the platform, it allows you to do so much more.
Yeah.
So to kind of summarize, A, it helps you understand what you're looking at much better, and B, it helps you look at more things, look at things more differently, etc.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really good point of kind of being able to grow your analytics, right? Because business is changing rapidly in the digital space with the onset of mobile and all of the different touch points we have with consumers. Really, you don't need a reporting tool, right? You need a platform that's going to help you gather all the data that you need from all of your digital touch points and then synthesize it into actionable reports. And if you don't understand all of the different parts to that platform, then you can't evolve or expand your analytics practice as the business may grow and move into different digital places.
Completely agree. Like my personal hope is that every person using our product makes it a slightly different product based on how they use it. And I feel the platform is what allows them to make that happen.
That's great. So one of the things that's really important, and something we talked about extensively in our first course, actually isn't really the platform, but it's the business, right? And understanding what's happening from a business perspective. And we talked a lot about creating a measurement plan for your business. Now, the measurement plan is one piece, the platform's another piece, and then you kind of combine them and you can create an implementation plan, right, that tells you how to implement analytics. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about, once you have a measurement plan, how do you kind of translate that based on your knowledge of the platform into implementation steps?
Right. And again, as you said, there are three key pieces here. Your business plan. So hopefully if you're going through the pains of tracking your business, doing analysis, there are certain goals you want to achieve. So figure out what is it that you want from your analytics tool, and then take a look at the platform and see what does the platform provide you. We were just talking sometime before this, and I mentioned that you're only as powerful as the tools you have access to.
Yeah.
So your platform is the tool set here. So it's like if you were trying to fly and you had access to an airplane versus you had access to a car, it would be two very different problems. So figure out what your platform allows you to do, map your business problems to those tools, and then see what data do you need to feed in and take out in order to achieve those objectives. So I mentally think of them as the 3 A's, I keep saying them. So you have accumulate, so you want to bring in data, you want to analyze, and then you want to take action. All of these should map back to your business. There are lots of things. So a good example would be conversions.
Yep.
So analytics as a platform allows you to measure different kinds of conversions. We have goals, we have transactions. So you should first ask, like, what is it that you're trying to achieve for your business? I use the example of a blog. Maybe for a blog, their goal is just to have user engagement. They want to get more users. So in that case, that's what you try to measure. Maybe for a blog, they show ads, and getting clicks on those ads is their main business. So then that becomes your objective. For a retailer, they're selling things. So for them, they would heavily use our e-commerce offering as opposed to our goals offering, because there are special advantages of using an e-commerce offering for a retailer. So you need to understand the platform, the data model. We have specific analysis which is only available for, like for example, for conversions. We have very powerful attribution and funneling support. So by mapping things to conversions, you can get that kind of analysis. So map your business problems to the tools, and that way you'll be able to leverage maximum benefit out of it.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer, and I know people always ask, if you had to pick 3 things in Google Analytics, what are the basic things that have to get set up? We've always talked about, like you just mentioned, setting up conversions. I think another feature that's really important is the campaign tracking, right? Because that helps you identify where people are coming from. So conversions help you measure, are people doing what I want? The campaign tracking helps measure, are they coming from my different marketing activities like email? What are a couple of other features that you usually like to talk about when getting your implementation set up the right way?
Right, I think you covered on some of them. The 3 most important ones in my mind is conversion, be it goals or e-commerce tracking. Filters would be another big one.
Filters is a great one.
And the third one would be channel grouping, which kind of falls under the bucket of campaign tracking. I'm surprised at how many people don't do any of these. So one tip for everyone watching this, if you have just these 3 things implemented, you've already created a huge strategic advantage for yourself as a marketer or as a practitioner. You'll be surprised how many people overlook the power of these tools. So to get back to the 3, so for conversions, as I mentioned, you probably have a certain goal and objective which you're trying to optimize. And so make sure you have your conversion set up. Over the years, we've added support for all kinds of conversions, be it engagement, be it actual tracking URLs, tracking events, tracking e-commerce for retailers. So there's a whole bunch of conversion support, and we'll keep adding more to that tool set. Filters. It's highly unlikely that the data you're sending us is completely pure and pristine.
Right.
So it's one of your biggest responsibilities to get good insights out of data is to make sure it's good data going in. Garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage in, garbage out. That's what we always say.
A good example would be, imagine if you have an internal test team that hammers your site to test its how powerful it is, how much load it can withstand. You probably want to drop that traffic before you show your overall performance report to your CMO. So filters allow you to drop your internal traffic, allow you to segment by groups of people. So if you want to set up a set of reports for your US visitors versus your visitors from Europe, it allows you to do that. So please take a look at filters. It helps you both enhance the data as well as clean up the data. And thirdly, channel grouping, which leads to campaign tracking. We did an entire revamp of this a few months back, and the reception has been very powerful. We want to give you the tool so you can map your acquisition the same way you think of your business. A good example would be, imagine if you're paying a third-party site to refer traffic to your site. Now, to Google Analytics, that'll look like referral because we don't know about this arrangement you had, but you know that counts as paid traffic, and you want to let us know that. So with channel grouping, we allowed you tools to say, you know, even though this looks like plain referral traffic, this is actually affiliate tracking or paid traffic, or something might be social to you, like you might be running a separate sub-site which allows people to share their experiences. Now to us that's just another page, but to you that's social. So for you to be able to categorize your traffic in different buckets so that you can then get the best from an acquisition point of view is very important.
Yeah, and I think, you know, kind of tying this back to the whole platform view, a lot of these features, they build on top of each other. Like I love how you talked about filters right there, because kind of filters maybe would be considered maybe like a foundational thing because it really cleans up your data, like it purifies it so you don't have all that garbage, right? And then goals are like the next level because you absolutely need to measure conversions. And then as you keep leveling these things on, like the actionability and the usability of the data just increase almost exponentially. And I think a really great example of that is we have this amazing feature called Attribution Modeling, right? And the whole multi-channel funnels reports, which are phenomenal, right? Like you get to see this multi-session behavior and how your different marketing activities drive conversions. But you can't use that feature unless you've got goals set up, unless you're doing campaign tracking, unless you're kind of customizing your channel groupings. And so like those three things work together to then provide this amazing feature to me, which is really one of the most powerful parts of analytics. So you got to get all those things right.
I completely agree.
Cool. So when we talk about the Google Analytics platform, and specifically in this course, we talked about the current platform. And some of our students and some of the folks out there in internet land might know this as universal analytics. It's something we've been talking about for a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about how universal analytics in the current platform differs from the previous version of Google Analytics?
Oh, completely. So first and foremost, I'm super, super excited about universal analytics. Our team has spent...
This is Sagnik being super excited, by the way, just so everyone knows. This is super excited, Sagnik.
Super excited about universal analytics.
You should see kind of calm and passive Sagnik.
But it's like we've invested so much engineering resource and from a platform development point of view in universal analytics. Like I can go on record and say universal analytics is going to be the future of analytics. Like our entire future strategy is around it. So if you are sticking with the old version, you need to change because others will like rocket past you. So please, please, please consider universal analytics. It's been a little more than a year since it's been out, and the adoption has been phenomenal. But universal analytics allows a whole bunch of things. To me, it's the three key biggest things it allows is, A, it opens up the measurement protocol, and that's been huge. What it allows people to do is take analytics beyond web analytics to just analytics. So you no longer have to just track your website. You can tie it back to your business. You can tie it back to your store. You can tie it back to your user data. So it opens up the protocol and says, you can send us data from anywhere, and you can send us any kind of data. So we've seen people do fascinating things. We've seen people track their coffee machines. We've seen people track their point of sale systems. That's by opening up the protocol, it really opens up the platform.
And the measurement protocol, that's the hit of that's literally the transmission mechanism of how you send us a hit of data.
Exactly, and that is no longer tied to your JavaScript. It's no longer tied to 3 or 4 cookies sitting in your browser. And by freeing up that, we've essentially empowered the entire user base to do a wide range of things. The second big thing that Universal Analytics allows is it allows you to set your own user ID. Increasingly, businesses are trying to look at users and not sessions or cookies by giving you the ability to track a user in the same way your business thinks of a user. So to you, a user might be a sign-up ID for your business. To you, a user might be a loyalty card number. We allow you to map your users in the same way you think of it. And there are a whole bunch of things you can do with that. You can do cross-device tracking. You can do cross-device attribution. You can actually, there's a whole gamut of things that you can do. So that's the second big thing. The third thing is we've really opened up the ability to send us custom data, be it through custom dimensions and metrics, be it through dimension widening. With Universal Analytics, we really allow you to map your data model to what you think of. So for example, if demographic data is a critical part of your business, so imagine if for every person visiting your site, you somehow know whether they fall under paid membership or free membership. You should be able to send us that kind of data. Even though analytics doesn't know that, you should be able to augment the data model with these two attributes, membership type and maybe something else. And that way, that becomes a first-class entity in your data. And now you can segment all your reports. If you're looking at your entire sales, you can say, I want to see what fraction of my sales comes from my premium users versus my freemium users, etc. So it really allows you to map the data in your own way and really opens up the platform and the power of it.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really, really good point there. You know, a lot of the stuff that you just mentioned is all about the data, right? And so if we have analytics and now it can ingest lots of different types of data, well, the tools within analytics can still function in their same normal way on that data, right? So now if the data is coming from kiosks or if the data is coming from set-top boxes, you can still do segmentation, you can create custom reports, you can create custom dashboards. You can use all of those tools with that same pool of data, which is amazing.
I mean, I couldn't have said it better. One of the things we focused on in the last few years is to separate the analysis tools from the data coming in, as opposed to having them strongly tied, which, as you mentioned, allows people to send any kind of data and then apply the same sophisticated tools that we've built on top of it. So to take your kiosk example, if a particular user uses both a kiosk and later a site, and you can track them, now you can do segmentation based on them. So you can ask questions like, how many people did A followed by B? So you can see how many people were acquired via a kiosk or were actually a website user who then later used your kiosk somewhere else. So we've really separated the two and in the process made the overall platform more powerful.
So one of the features that we got a few questions about, and one that I'd like to explore a little bit more closely with you, is the user ID feature. I think this is the one that is probably going to be the most powerful for businesses, because it does exactly what you said. It allows businesses to use their identifier in the analytics data, right? And so if I'm an airline, that might be a frequent flyer number, right? And so when I'm logged into a kiosk, when I'm logged into an app on my mobile device, when I'm logged into the website, that ID, that frequent flyer ID, can be used kind of as the glue to hold those sessions together. Can you tell us a little bit more maybe about like how a business would go about like literally doing that, adding that ID?
Yeah, so there are multiple ways of doing it. And again, I think the true strength of a platform is there is no one solution, so everybody can innovate with the platform. We've seen lots of interesting things already being done. So to take the offline conversion example that you kind of suggest, like let's take the airline example. So imagine you come to a site. So at that point, your JavaScript has access to the client-side cookie value, and then you go to the site, you enter your loyalty card. So what the airline company can do is actually log that information on their side. So they now have a mapping of the client-side cookie value, which is what analytics was receiving from the JavaScript, and the corresponding loyalty card ID. Now later someone actually goes to the airline kiosk and actually does some action using just their loyalty card ID. But now the airline actually had access to the corresponding client ID, and because we've opened up the measurement protocol, they can send us a hit saying, by the way, this client ID then later checked into this physical location. And this is only possible because the kiosk is no longer reliant on cookies. We allow you to set up the user ID any which way. Eventually with time, and we're already seeing this, people will build these kind of ID controlling services, etc. So some people have done interesting work around that, but it was literally as simple as for an airline company to map their client ID with their loyalty card ID and then sending us hits mapping, doing a reverse mapping. So it's very, very powerful that way.
Yeah, and so that's the key is, you know, businesses need to have that ID, right? And obviously, if you don't, that's fine. You can still use analytics, but you just don't get some of the advanced features like the cross-device measurement and things like that.
And again, I think the critical thing to keep in mind is that it need not be an exact science. If you have a single logged in ID, that's great. On the other hand, if you only have a partial subset of users who log in, that's great too. I might only get logged in information from 10% of my users, but I think I can get a lot of insights from that 10% and extrapolate that. Sometimes users might be partially logged in. Sometimes there might be incentives to allow a user. A survey might be a good tool to allow users to give in some kind of information which might not be personally identifiable, but still better than just a first-party browser-dependent cookie. So ask yourself what kind of user-level information your business has access to. And on our side, we've taken amazing amount of effort to make sure things are done in a privacy-sensitive way, that we are respectful of the end-user privacy constraints, etc. So really asking the question, how can my business leverage this solution? I'm sure there's some way, ranging from complete logged-in experience to absolutely anonymous. So,
and again, the value of a platform is that you can work within it, right? It gives you lots of different, I kind of like to think of it as duct tape, right? Like you can kind of duct tape up a solution that's best for you in your current environment, and you know, as you grow, you can undo a little bit and then redo it again. So, so obviously, excuse me, a lot of people are super excited about Universal. I've been really excited about it. Feel like we've been talking about it for a long time. But there are a couple of parts that are not at parity with the existing GA. So can you tell us a little bit about, well, when can we expect this, and then, you know, the future of Universal?
Why would you say that? No, but we are very aware. It's been, as I mentioned, just about a year post-launch. We've reached parity for a whole bunch of features in the past few months. I'm not going to give an exact date, but what I'm going to say is very, very soon. Very, very, very soon. I can go on for the rest of this hangout just saying very, very, very soon. You'll have full feature parity plus a whole bunch of extra new features which will be Universal Analytics only. So as I mentioned in the beginning, that in my mind there will be no reason for people to stick with the old platform. It's Universal Analytics is like the new car that runs on electric and doesn't need charging.
So I think there's also something that's really important here to understand is that if you haven't started thinking about Universal Analytics, you should probably do that. Now, obviously, it's not like Universal is going to come and the old version is going to go away. Everything's going to work fine. But you should really have a plan for your business to change from the standard version of Google Analytics to Universal Analytics, because it's, you know, you've got to make some coding changes. You need to do a small change to your data, which actually isn't a lot of work. So having a plan in place is critical. And you might even want to consider moving to tag management, right? If you're going to upgrade, Google Tag Manager will support Universal Analytics. And if you don't use tag management, this is a fantastic time to kind of reevaluate that, because tag management will make everything easier, not just Universal Analytics.
I completely agree. Like, we already have first-class support for Universal Analytics in Google Tag Manager, so it really facilitates. We have a section in our configuration now that allows you to migrate to Universal Analytics. One of the big things we added was you don't lose your past data gathered from non-Universal Analytics days when you do a switchover. And a big part of our team, what they're looking at is to make this transition very, very smooth, so people don't feel any kind of hiccups.
All right, well, let's move on to some questions. We could have done just all questions for this time, but we wanted to talk a little bit about the platform. So one of the first questions comes from Ben. And Ben asked us a question via the forum. And he asked a question specifically about Lesson 2.2, which is, we talk about collection in Lesson 2. And his question has to do with the user ID feature. So Ben asks, can anyone share more detail on how to create your own identifier, and maybe some of the do's and don'ts associated with using an identifier? My goal is to tie offline transactions that happen after a site visit to site activity reported within Google Analytics.
Right. So Ben, what can I say? Been there, done that. We we just kind of attacked a similar problem. So for example, if you have some kind of user identifier, be a loyalty card, be it something you know about the user at the site level, then you can map your client ID back to that identifier, and hopefully when the offline transactions or point of sales interactions happen, it happens with that user identifier, so you can then map it back and send us IDs. As I mentioned, people have user ID brokerage services, etc. The important things to keep in mind is, as I said, data need not be 100% of 100% coverage. The other thing is, as I mentioned, we are very privacy sensitive, so we don't want you to send us personally identifiable information which is globally personally identifiable. It's okay if you know something about a user, but you can map it to something which then obfuscates the user to us. So a classic example would be, imagine a user enters their name in your system. We would not like you to send us their name, but then you can map that name to some ID and send us that ID. So that way we know with that ID that this is the same user across multiple touch points, but then you can take that information out and map it back to your user base, etc.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, it's some type of string, some group of characters, right, that only you would understand. So our next question comes from Clark. And Clark asked us a question via our Google Plus community for students. And this also has to do with collection. The question is it possible to use Google Analytics for non-website data? For example, I'd like to collect metrics for a Google spreadsheet. How can I use Google Analytics for things other than a website?
Great question, and that's our big hope. Like I've said this before, it is not Google Web Analytics, it's Google Analytics. So we encourage and really want people to track their entire business, both on-site as well as off-site, using Google Analytics. And the measurement protocol is what facilitates this.
Yep.
I gave examples of people tracking their coffee machine,
yep,
their point of sale systems, and there have been really innovative stuff like just search for Universal Analytics and you'll see tons of crazy/innovative solutions people have built. But I've seen users who actually have nothing which is online and still track using Universal Analytics. Wow. So they have complete offline businesses that they send pings to us so that they can use our segmentation tool, our analysis tools, our visualization tools, but their entire business is offline. With the measurement protocol, especially with custom dimensions and metrics, you can completely customize the data model, which is, I think, very powerful.
Yeah, and so and again, that measurement protocol is kind of like the core, right? It's how data is sent to analytics. And so we actually use the measurement protocol when we build the JavaScript that people might use on their websites. It's also used in our SDKs for mobile. So if you want to track your iOS app or your Android app, there's a Google Analytics SDK that you can add in, and it kind of makes it easy to send the data, right? And if you're doing something that's totally different, like we've talked a lot about like a kiosk, you would actually embed the measurement protocol into the code that's running on that kiosk. So you'd have to find your nerd, get to your developer, and say, okay, when someone touches this button, I want you to send this hit of data off to analytics.
Right. Again, continuing with my series of bad analogies, I think of earlier we were only in the business of building houses. Now we still build great houses, but we also give you the building blocks, the bricks, the mortar and paint and everything. So if you like the house we built, you can stay on it. If not, you can build your better house with our tools.
And actually, Clark, just to answer your specific question about Google Spreadsheets, you actually can't track Google Spreadsheets or Google Docs with Google Analytics because there's no way to add the JavaScript into those things. So unfortunately, can't track those, but can track all sorts of other things like dog collars, coffee machines, stuff that you'd want to track all the time. Okay, let's move on to another question. This question comes from Trey, and it's about configuration settings. Could you provide more details on what configuration settings I should use? Or can you tell me about ones that are important and often get overlooked?
Right, and I think we covered this earlier. But the three key ones I would mention again are filters, which helps you clean up your data, conversions, be it goals or be it e-commerce transactions, which then let you specify, like almost classify your traffic as valuable versus the rest of your traffic. And then finally, channel group, which lets you kind of map your acquisition to your business needs.
And I'll throw in a plug for, I think often ones that get overlooked are ones that may seem a little bit more involved in terms of setting up. I am a huge fan of custom dimensions. Absolutely feel like that's one of the most important parts of analytics because you're sending custom data, right? And it aligns analytics more closely with what you're trying to do. So I love custom dimensions. And I'm a huge fan of events. Event tracking lets people get more granular information. I've spent a lot of time helping people figure out how to track scrolling, right? So you can see people reading on pages. So they're a little bit more involved, but they increase the data and the more actionable data, in my opinion.
Completely. And another plug for Google Tag Manager.
Yeah.
If you're using event tracking, Google Tag Manager is actually taking this whole configuration-driven approach of Google Analytics and extending it to events. So they have very good first-class support for tracking events using Google Tag Manager. The other thing I would mention, there are a lot of advertisers in Google Analytics user base. Consider linking your accounts. That's very, very important. We are surprised at how often the same user has an AdWords account and an analytics account, is trying to track the same thing, but they wouldn't have linked them together. Please do that because we've built a lot of tools on both sides to leverage this overall ecosystem of advertising and on-site or off-site analysis. So by linking the accounts, you will unleash a whole new range of tools and analysis techniques. So
yeah, that's a great one, the account linking. And actually, we have a question from Lucy specifically about account linking. And it goes something like this. When linking the AdWords or Webmaster Tools accounts to Google Analytics, is the data actually imported so that if the accounts were ever unlinked, would the historical data still exist in the Google Analytics reports?
So great question. This one's a little more nuanced. So Webmaster Tools and AdWords, they're two separate answers. For Webmaster Tools, it is truly an on-the-fly importing. So if you unlink the data is not persisted on our side. So as you unlink, the data completely goes away.
Okay.
The good thing is when you link back, the data completely comes back.
Okay.
AdWords is a little more nuanced because what happens there is you do send us some information through the hits.
Got it.
So you would have seen the gclid parameter in the URL, which sends us that a particular click happened, which we can then widen, bring in more information from AdWords. So the key thing to keep in mind is the widening happens on the fly, but the fact that the click happened and you sent us that information is persisted.
Got it.
So if you unlink an AdWords account, you'll miss a lot of the widened information. Like you'll see the impression count, which we import on the fly, go away. A lot of the campaign data and things associated with it go away. But basic things like the fact that this happened because of a Google click will still stay.
Got it.
That kind of information.
Yeah, so you'll still be able to see, here's the number of conversions because of Google AdWords, here's the number of transactions because of Google AdWords, but you won't be able to see things like ad slot or the cost data.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. That's a good one. Great, that was a really cool question, and it's cool to dig a little bit deeper into some of the inner workings. So we had another question. This question is about dimension widening, which is a fairly new feature that we have in analytics. And the question is, can dimension widening be applied to the event dimensions like category, action, and label? Or how about the campaign dimensions like campaign name? And I just want to remind people, dimension widening is how you can import data into analytics. And the fundamental way it works is you define a piece of data in analytics, and you define the same piece of data in like a file, and that becomes the key that joins up and you can map the data together.
Totally.
And so the question is here about can events or campaigns be used as that key to join the data?
Right. So not right now. We've kept the set of fields you can widen from limited, but very soon again, our objective, I can share our overall goal is to make every dimension both widenable as well as to be able to use it as the source of widening. So that's kind of what we are aiming towards. Obviously, there will be constraints around scope, etc. So for example, if you are widening on the visitor level information, there might be restrictions on what other dimension you can widen it to, etc. But our goal is within the data model to allow everything for both widening and as to be used as a source for widening.
Wow, that's great. Little coming attraction.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Awesome. Cool. All right, so I think we have time for one more question. I've got one here from Sean. And this has to do with reporting. Obviously, another thing that we covered a lot in the course. And it has to do with the combinations of dimensions and metrics, which we talked about specifically. And so Sean actually has a question about creating a specific report. And he wants to create a report that shows the number of unique visitors for a page on my site. And I think that gets into the general idea of the scope of data, right? And so you have like user and session level scope and hit level scope. So why don't we talk a little bit about that and then how Sean might be able to create a view of this data.
Right. So scope is a very, very important concept, one which we hadn't exposed very nicely in the past, but we're trying to fix that. Our new metadata model is highly scope specific and expect changes to that soon. We think of data in terms of 3 scopes largely: user, session, and hits. And going forward, we'll try to group everything in terms of these, and then we'll also set up very well-established rules of what is allowed with what other scope, because sometimes, for example, people get confused. A good example would be if you're looking at something which is hit level dimension with a session level scope, it can be misleading. An example would be if you're just looking at URLs versus visits. So visit is at the session level as a metric, URL is at the hit level. So a lot of URLs will return 0 for sessions. I think the question people are trying to ask is, in how many sessions did this URL appear? I think the answer we are giving is, how many times was this URL the start of a session? So these confusions happen, and we've gotten a lot of requests. So we're going to make scope more first class in our metadata. So using the API and even in the front end, you will be able to deal with scope better. But to get to the specific question, I think it's okay to propagate visitor level metrics, user level metrics, so in this case users, with hit level dimensions. So and we take care of it. So if you ask for the dimension URL or page title, depending on which is a better map of what you call page, and request for the metric visitors, you will see unique visitors. You will see the report that
Great.
I think Sean was requesting.
Okay.
So there you go, Sean.
Awesome. So that wraps up the questions, and I want to thank you so much for coming. This was a lot of fun.
No, thank you. Like you guys are doing an amazing job. Like seriously, like you're literally taking analytics to so many more people. We are super thrilled, and thank you so much for having me over.
Awesome, and obviously thanks to the students. A few things to tell you guys as we wrap up here. First and foremost, don't forget that this course, Google Analytics Platform Principles, is open through Thursday, March 27th. So that means if you would like to earn a certificate in this course, you need to complete all the lessons, all the assessments, and the final assessment by Thursday, March 27th. Now, after Thursday, March 27th, all of this material will still be available. You'll still be able to go to the website and still be able to watch the videos. But the big difference is that the course certificate will no longer be available. So you won't be able to earn a certificate after March 27th. So if you want to do that, March 27th, that's the deadline. You have another week and a day. Also wanted to mention a big note of thanks to the entire team that is bringing this Hangout to you and to this entire course. Christina, Gary, Chris, it's a big effort. Catherine was a huge help. I really appreciate it. So thanks to those guys. And stay tuned. We're working on a lot more courses. We've got a lot more material planned for you guys, and we're super excited to launch our next course very, very soon. So that's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks again for joining us, everybody, and have a wonderful day.